welcome to our special Souls to the Polls conversation with the fraternity's General Chaplain, Brother Reverend Dr. J. Augustine, and myself, your host for tonight, Brother Eric Christopher Webb. I'm the Director of Communications and Editor of the Sphinx for the fraternity. I also have the honor of serving as an ordained interfaith minister who privately consults and collaborates with various faith-based communities on social awareness and community change campaigns. The goal of this conversation is to provide critical information and encouragement to our Alpha brothers, our other D9 counterparts, the general public, as well as those serving and engaged in faith-based communities on how to get the vote out, the importance of early voting, and the fraternity's upcoming Souls to the Polls Day on October 20th. Now, as I've mentioned, our special guest is Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated General Chaplain, Brother Reverend Dr. J. Augustine, who is also the pastor of St. Joseph AME Church in Durham, North Carolina, and also an attorney. Now, before we begin our conversation, I'd like to first welcome Brother Augustine and allow him to offer some opening remarks. Brother Augustine.
Hey, Brother Webb, thank you so much for the opportunity to have a conversation tonight with you and by extension with all of our brothers. I am so excited. I'm filled with optimism. I'm energized because of the upcoming election. I want to do certainly all I can, and I want to encourage everyone to do all they can to make sure everyone is voting. It's critical. We have seen such a positive spotlight placed on HBCUs because of one of the nominees for president. She so happens to also be an AKA, a sister of the Divine Nine. If I can show my hands for a moment, I'm a proud graduate of Howard University. She is a proud graduate of Howard University. Our intention tonight is not to be partisan and to talk about any one candidate, but it is to be candid and talk about the positive attention that's been placed on us and by extension on all African Americans. So thank you so much for the opportunity to have a conversation and talk about the importance of voting and logistically how we hope to motivate everybody to vote.
Brother Augustine, thank you so much. So let's begin our conversation. Now, during the primary season, your church, St. Joseph AME Church, conducted its own Souls to the Polls outreach and was featured on the cover of USA Today, if I'm not mistaken, with Alpha prominently featured every voter in every election. Tell me about that. Tell me a little bit about that.
So we at St. Joseph, the church, number one, celebrating its 155th anniversary this year, has a rich history in Durham, one of the most political areas in the state of North Carolina, a state that we all know this election cycle in particular is a true swing state, a true battleground state. But the church has a rich history of political activism, speaking out on behalf of the marginalized, speaking out on behalf of those who have been pushed to the margins in the social periphery. I am delighted for the last 6 years to have served as the church's pastor. I'd like to think I fit the mold well of what has historically been expected of the leader at St. Joseph. And I'm certainly doing all I can to take us to higher heights and to keep pushing the ball down the field. Habitually, we do Souls to the Polls. Even through the pandemic, during the course of my service there, we did Souls to the Polls to encourage people, as we say, every voter in every election, right? In particular, this year, though, 2024, given the primaries, given the fact that democracy is really on the line, we have worked to establish a tried and true partnership with neighboring North Carolina Central University, an HBCU, with many organizations in the community that I like to call stakeholders, meaning the church works in collaboration with Beta Theta Lambda chapter, the fraternity's affiliate where I'm a proud member now. We work in collaboration with other organizations that are members of the D9. We work in collaboration with the Masons and the Eastern Stars, certainly other civic associations, other alumni groups and the like, alumni groups from NCCU, from North Carolina A&T and so forth. So we really have a collaborative affair where everyone assembles in church for powerful worship, for soul-stirring worship, for very motivating worship, to remind us in sort of the spirit of the Sankofa. As we look forward, casting our ballots, looking forward for the future of the country, we also look back and we remember the things we have been through. We remember the mountains we've had to climb. So we were featured on the cover of USA Today as part of a proud partnership. So tonight, I hope to hold out some of the lessons learned as part of that partnership for other churches to hopefully follow suit.
So how does Souls to the Polls work? We're calling on our churches, our alpha pastors, and also all of our D9 pastors to participate. So how does it actually work? How if I am a pastor at a church, how do I organize this? How do I organize the outreach? What constitutes the outreach, and what constitutes the collaboration?
So we are obviously this is Alpha's leadership, but we are not limiting this effort to Alphas. We are reaching out interfaith in interfaith capacity to other denominations, to other faith traditions. We're reaching out to all members of the D9. We're reaching out to all African-American churches. We're reaching out to all progressive churches, all those who would intertwine their politics with their worship. And I'm deliberately not saying partisanship to be associated with politics, but being political, as far as I'm concerned, is a part of what we're supposed to do in ministry. So Souls to the Polls, if I can just historically back up, because this is a rich Alpha tradition, if I can call it that. 1957 was 3 years after the historic Brown v. Board of Education decision of 1954. There was a rally in Washington for peace, a peacekeeping pilgrimage, or pilgrimage and prayer pilgrimage for peace. Martin Luther King Jr., our fraternity brother, one of the most storied brothers to ever wear the black and gold, gave a famous address where he said, "Give us the ballot and we will trouble the federal government no more. We'll be able to take care of our own needs." That led to many African-American churches organizing, protesting, becoming civically engaged as part of the ongoing civil rights movement, obviously until 1965, when in the wake of Bloody Sunday, only months later, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, August the 6th, 1965. After that, after many of the factors that limited our participation in voting were torn down, churches mobilized, oftentimes on Sundays. Churches mobilized in order to bring people to the polling places. Just like the Montgomery bus boycott was a well-orchestrated machine, churches did the same sort of thing then, bringing souls to the polls. So that name has a very, very rich history in our Alpha tradition, but especially in faith traditions. Here, we are calling on churches, we're calling on synagogues, we're calling on mosques, we're calling on the interfaith community to really do the same and to work collaboratively with others. Certainly, we want to make sure every individual that is a member of his or her church is voting, but we want to make sure we are working collaboratively to overperform, if you will, to make sure everyone who is registered to vote, to increase registration rolls, but to make sure everyone who is registered to vote gets out to vote, has transportation to vote, has a motivation to vote, understands the importance of voting. And that's really what Souls to the Polls is all about. So my interest is tonight in encouraging our members, encouraging anyone who listen to please, regardless of fraternity or sorority affiliation, to please partner with others, be deliberate in reaching out to other organizations to make sure we are overperforming at our local precincts and getting out the vote.
So getting out the vote is the real push with this conversation and with Souls to the Polls. Now, you're a lawyer. We've seen over the last few years a lot of laws being passed that have worked to disenfranchise the get out the vote movement. What should those who are watching now be prepared for when they're participating with Souls on the Poll? What kind of challenges will pastors face as far as I know in some states, I believe they're not allowing early voting on Sunday and things of that nature. So can you talk a little bit about that, or do you have any insight on that?
Absolutely. So I have had the pleasure of living in multiple states. I am a lawyer on inactive status now, I'm proud to say, a member of the Louisiana bar. And I say that illustratively just to lift up that the laws are different in each state. What you have categorized, though, closing polling places on Sundays, narrowing the amount of polling places that exist in certain communities, particularly in African-American communities, all fall under the umbrella of voter suppression laws. They are attempts to make it harder for African Americans to vote, to make it more onerous, and consequentially to intimidate African Americans in many regard and to keep them from voting. The laws will vary from state to state, but I will give an example of Louisiana and I'll give an example of North Carolina. In Louisiana, as in many other states in the South, early voting is one thing, but you have to register to vote generally 30 days before the election. So in many cases, yesterday, October 7th, individuals would have had to have been registered to vote by yesterday in order to participate in the forthcoming November 5th general election. In North Carolina, for example, even if now you are not registered to vote, we hope you are, but even if now you're not registered to vote during the early voting period, there is a such thing as same day voting. That is a great time to clear anything up. If there are any issues, if there are any prohibitions, go early vote, clear it up then, make sure your vote is counted, make sure you are part of a big movement to get others to vote too. There's a such thing as provisional ballots. I really want to discourage people from dealing with provisional ballots because that means by definition you've waited till election day and there's some sort of issue, so they're allowing you to vote provisionally, and then that gives so much discretion to those who monitor the polling place to make a decision later if the vote will count. I've seen so many things in social media feeds, and here's another example of purging. In the state of Georgia, the current governor, who was elected after narrowly defeating Stacey Abrams, a wonderful sister from another mister, just a few years ago, was acting as Secretary of State then, and he purged hundreds of thousands of individuals from the voting rolls. Primarily, or the vast majority of them, were African Americans. Fast forward, Stacey Abrams lost by a very, very, very small margin. What I'm trying to say is that now that's illustrative that now there's so many states that are purging voters for whatever reason, but purging voters from the rolls. I'm encouraging people to early vote. October 20th is what we're calling National Souls to the Polls Day, a part of early voting. If you early vote and there is an issue, if the state has same day voter registration, you'll be back active on the rolls and your vote will count, opposed to waiting until election day where you've got to cast a provisional ballot. So again, you're as right as rain. Our focus is to encourage everyone to vote, but I want to encourage everybody to make a plan, to be collaborative, to go with others, to go with other groups, and to early vote. And that's exactly why we're calling October 20th Souls to the Polls. So hopefully we can energize our faith communities to be a part of the early voting process.
Thank you. So before we go on, I just wanted to encourage those viewers to please post questions in the chat, and we will try to address some of those questions. But we definitely want to be mindful of our viewers, and so we can engage our viewers and provide that information, that much needed information. Brother Augustine, you've made the distinction between partisan and being political. What are some partisan things that would violate the law?
Sure. So I want to back up, and this is so self-serving, so forgive me. The last book that I wrote is the name of it, and it's over my shoulder, that shoulder, I suppose. When Prophets Preach: Leadership and the Politics of the Pulpit. Thank you so much for the close-up right there. That way, there it is, right? When Prophets Preach: Leadership and the Politics of the Pulpit. One of the distinctions I make in encouraging pastors to be political, as we are now, we're having a political conversation, is to be political, but not to be partisan, not to cross the line with 501c3 laws and violate those laws, anything that will jeopardize your tax-exempt status. There is a distinction between the two. Churches, nonprofit organizations that are engaged in social advocacy, we're allowed to talk about issues. And by definition, when you talk about issues, you are being political. The word politics or political comes from the Greek polis, P-O-L-I-S, which means affairs of the cities. It simply means you're dealing with the allocation of resources with fairness and equity. When pastors stand up and they talk about water problems and pollution in water, they're being political. When pastors stand up and they talk about school zoning and busing and children not having adequate education, they're being political. But neither of those instances is being partisan. So churches are well allowed to be political, and pastors should be political. The gospel that I read, as far as Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, bless the bed that I sleep on, Jesus was incredibly political, because he was from a ethnically marginalized class, and he spoke out for fairness and justice. So Jesus himself was incredibly political, but not partisan. Your question was, what are some of the things churches should not do to cross the line into partisanship? When you give resources for a particular candidate, when you endorse a particular candidate, when you work collaboratively with a particular candidate's campaign, those things can be seen as being partisan if you don't give equal sharing to both candidates in a race. So rather than engaging in that sort of gamesmanship, did you give 50% time to one, 50% time to the other? Did I use the church bus to bring voters to the polls, only those voters who are voting D or those voters who are only voting R? Rather than engaging in those sort of things, as long as we're talking issues, as long as we're talking matters that concern the community that the pastor represents, the pastor, his or her parishioners, those matters are inherently political, but those matters will never cross the line to be partisan. And I hope that fine line makes sense.
Definitely, definitely. So are we suggesting that, the churches rent buses and literally bring everyone to the polling place on whatever day they designate, or our day we designate?
That is absolutely commendable. And I will give an example. I am fortunate to serve a church that has a couple of vans and a bus. We are very deliberate in setting up a call line to make sure during the period of early voting, as well as on election day, people can call us to, if they need a ride, we want to get them to the polls. We are also doing something in our faith tradition. This is illustrative of ours, but it's an example, I think, for others. We have what is called a class leader system, as to where a church may be any number, however many hundreds, thousands of people, but you have a class leader who can get in touch with on a weekly basis, monthly basis, what have you, maybe 10 to 12 folks, right? A class, if you will. As long as that leader is calling 10 to 12 folks, making sure, do you have a plan to vote? Do you need transportation to vote? Do you need help getting your groceries? Want to make sure your temporal needs are taken care of, make sure your spiritual needs are taken care of, but make sure your political needs are taken care of also, right? So as long as a church can coordinate, whether it's renting a van or a bus, whether it's working collaboratively with another organization that will volunteer its van or its bus, whether it owns a van or a bus, absolutely getting people out to the polls to vote is critically important. It's the right thing to do.
How about I'm thinking kind of out of the box. How about carpooling? We did it with the Montgomery bus boycott, the churches. And now how about pulling together a carpool? If they're smaller churches and you don't have necessarily a bus or whatnot for your congregants, maybe folks can carpool and create a carpool system.
You are absolutely right. And I will share again, one of the things, and if viewers care to Google St. Joseph AME Church Souls to the Polls, there's enough footage out there, enough online news coverage where we normally do caravans, where some people may come to church via public transportation. Others, especially students, may come to church with a ride from somebody else. But we caravan on Souls to the Polls Day, and the media picks it up and runs with it. Long caravan, flags up, horns honking, exciting everybody in the community as we go to a neighboring precinct. In our case, it's the precinct at North Carolina Central University, which is, of course, an HBCU, which has been a targeted precinct because historically it has underperformed for a variety of reasons, and it was on the threat list of closure. As I mentioned, certain voter suppression laws making it harder for people to vote, taking precincts out of certain neighborhoods, and the school is in a historically Black neighborhood. So we will caravan, church members riding together, generating excitement among others in the community who may want to join in. It's all about drumming up excitement. It's all about sharing resources. It's a communal affair. Let me also say something I'm very proud of. The Beta Theta Lambda chapter has received funding. They've applied through grants and they've received funding for Get Out the Vote efforts. Our church has received funding, applying to others for Get Out the Vote efforts. We have got it now to a science as to where, what time will the DJ show up? the hot dogs and the food. It's party at the poll now, right? So we really generate excitement for everybody to come from that caravan. We worship in the morning. We'll get a powerful word, again, a Sankofa moment as we look forward, but also deliberately looking back. We will caravan, go to the polling place. There's food there. There's music there. It's a great opportunity for fellowship and to be civically engaged. A voteless people is a hopeless people, and we hope to provide immense hope, not just in our community, but we want to let the light of Alpha shine all throughout America.
Brother Augustine, so why is this election so important?
You know, democracy is on the line. In a huge way, democracy is on the line. I'm in my home library here, and there's a book I read, which is probably on the shelf over this way. There's a book I read last year called How Democracies Die. And the gentleman who wrote it, two Harvard professors, looked at some other countries, third world countries almost, but countries that had a democratic rule, small d, of course, full citizen participation rule. And an autocratic leader came along and undermined democracy. Adolf Hitler would be a great example of it, a more known example, obviously in Germany, and the way he took with his political party, with the Nazi, which was a political party, right? And really undermined democracy in that space. As I was turning the pages of the book, I said, my God, this sounds so familiar. This is so eerie. I turned the page of the book and they talked about the 2016 election in America. And I said, oh, my goodness gracious. And then we saw a particular candidate that they talked about and the threat that particular candidate, a candidate now, but the person who ended up winning that election, the threat that they posed to democracy. I'm a big fan of Maya Angelou. And she had a famous saying that when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. So democracy is really on the line in America. I am a very proud veteran. I had the honor of serving as an infantry officer in the United States Army, and there are some things to me that are sacrosanct, and democracy is something that is sacrosanct. But when I think back about January 6, 2021, it was almost the end of democracy as we know it in America. I thank goodness for the courage of some that stood tall and stood their conscience, or stood with their conscience opposed to their party, particular Vice President Mike Pence. But democracy is not a fathom. Democracy is something you get up and you have to protect and you have to work for each and every day. So the more and more people participate in elections, the more democratic our process will be. And as long as the voices are heard and voices are counted, as in votes counted, we have a full democratic process. And America will continue to be a free country with free and fair elections. If we stay home, if we allow others to subvert our vote, if we allow others to distract our attention, America will cease being a democracy. I have no doubt in my mind about that. We have seen deliberate efforts to roll back African-American advancement in recent years. We've seen violent vigilante efforts by some who are intimidated by the change in racial demographics in the United States. Some would call it the Great Replacement Theory. Others would call it the White Replacement Theory. Enacting violence at the Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, just a couple of years ago. Obviously, as an AME minister, I'm well acquainted with the violence that occurred at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Democracy has got to be protected, and the rule of law has got to be protected. The only way our interests will be represented is if we vote. So 2024, you hear it every year, but it's true this time. 2024 is the most consequential election of our lifetimes.
So we're not encouraging people to vote for any candidate, just to vote up and down the ballot. So why is that so critical to vote up and down the ballot?
Thank you so much for. And I'm sorry, thank you so much for raising that. I actually was speaking with a group today, and someone made a joke and said, I'm running for the city council, I'm running for whatever, and I'm on the back of your ballot. So start at the back and work your way up, right? And that's, much of truth is made in jest. The last thing we want to do is underperform or undervote. I hope everybody is pretty clear on where their allegiance, dreams, aspirations stand in terms of the president and vice president. I hope if you're in a state like mine, like in North Carolina, I think it's pretty clear on who the next governor of the state is going to be. It's probably very clear with the statewide office candidates, right? Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and the like. But it's equally as important to vote in your state legislative races. Those are the people that draw congressional districts. It's equally as important, obviously, to vote in congressional districts, those people who represent us in Washington. And we've had nothing but gridlock over the last few years. So we need to have progress instead of regress. But more importantly, in going down the ballot, as I think about school board members, as I think about attempts to ban books, as I think about attempts to redefine what critical race theory is, and use it in a vilified fashion in order to justify the banning of books. You know, I did an interview a couple of years ago when the banter about critical race theory started to just heat up in the popular mainstream. And someone said, you know, they were describing critical race theory, describing it. My face probably was like, and I was like, that's not consistent with any. And the person just went on and talking, well, are you familiar with critical race theory? I said, brother, I studied it in law school. And what you're describing has absolutely nothing to do with what I studied, right? So people have used things now to vilify talking points, but school board elections are real and they're consequential because those are people that are making decisions about the curriculum and books that will be used and how students will be taught, whether it will be a version of history that's accurate or whether it will be some story, his story or history, right? So I guess I'm saying that illustratively to say that your interests, our interests should be represented up and down the ballot and up and down the entire ballot. Let me also say this. Don't forget the judges. Don't forget the justices. In North Carolina, we have got a critical state Supreme Court race. We have had some unprecedented matters with a turn in control of our state Supreme Court and unprecedented political matters that have been overly partisan matters, right? So state Supreme Courts are where most of the bucks will stop. It is imperative that we're voting for judges or justices, as the case may be, from the lowest courts up to your state Supreme Court. It's imperative that we're participating every voter in every election and that we're informed and we help others to be informed too.
How best can people get informed? I mean, oftentimes with elections, it's whoever has the most money to send out the most mailers to get the most visibility. And that is the platform and the candidates and the issues that are put in front of people. And with that being said, people may be missing out on a more viable candidate that really suits their interests. So what's a quick get up to speed way, some recommendations you can make?
One of the things I have seen, and I'm talking in a D9 capacity, one of the things I have seen personally that has been incredibly effective are candidate forums that have been sponsored by the lovely ladies of Delta Sigma Theta. The Greensboro alumni chapter, about 45 minutes up the road from me in Durham, does a wonderful job of bringing candidates together, as do the chapter here in Durham for that matter. But the Greensboro chapter, I think, has taken it to higher heights, into a perfect state of perfection almost, right? They're civically engaged. People know you're going to have a broad stream of the community there. That's where your voters are. That's where people who want to know more about candidates, know more about candidate positions, rather than looking at TV ads that, to your point, the market may be saturated with mailings or with false advertisements. Simply because somebody had enough money to put something together does not make it true. But it's incumbent on us as organizations like Alpha to partner with other organizations like the Masons, like the Eastern Stars, like whoever the case may be, to have candidate forums, to make sure people are accessible, to make sure that candidates, make sure that voters have the opportunity to know more about the issues, even tax issues, referendum issues. Those matters are critically important also. And I think it's up to us to make sure information is freely shared in the community by hosting candidate forums.
Okay, so let's jump here, and this is probably going to be our last question. Why is it important to take advantage of these early voting options?
So again, one of the things that I'll use North Carolina as an example, the law will vary from state to state, but in North Carolina, it's one state that I think got it right as to where the early voting period also allows same day registration. Because of the very voter suppression laws that you referenced before, so many people are purged from the voting rolls. An example may be if you don't vote in 3 consecutive elections in state law. I'm not saying North Carolina, but I'm saying I've seen this. If you don't vote in so many consecutive elections, then you're purged from the voting rolls. The presumption is that you're dead, right? Whatever the case may be, they will purge you from the rolls, and then you show up on election day, well intended to vote, and find out you're not a registered voter. And guess what? It's too late. So number one, I would encourage people to check your voter registration status to ensure you're still on the voter rolls as an active voter. Number two, if you are not, register prayerfully before the deadline. In some states, again, the deadline passed now. The deadline would have been yesterday, 30 days out or 30 plus days out in order to vote. But in other states like North Carolina, you have same day voter registration. That is wonderful. It's progressive. Many states now require you not just to take an oath or affidavit to say, hey, my name is Eric Webb. Hey, my name is J. Augustine. Please allow me to vote. They require you to bring photo ID. We've had some nuances in North Carolina with what photo ID means. I'm so proud of the leadership given by our alpha brother, the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II, years ago when he was serving as president of the state conference of the NAACP. He took a lawsuit to the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals that challenged the voter photo ID requirements in North Carolina. The court came back and sided with his leadership and said, you, General Assembly, the North Carolina legislature, have targeted African Americans with surgical precision. And I'm quoting the language from the court there, right? So some photo IDs, student IDs were not good. Why weren't they good? Maybe because we have 10 HBCUs in North Carolina. In other cases, certain photo IDs were good. Military IDs. I wonder why. My point being, take advantage of early voting. Make sure if there are any issues, they can be cured. Make sure your vote counts. Democracy is on the line. I'm going to give the stump speech again. The 2024 election, no matter how many times you've heard it in the past as hyperbole, it is absolutely true now, is the most consequential election of our lifetimes. Please make sure your voice is heard. Please don't limit it to yourself because it's too important. Work collaboratively with others. October 20th is National Souls to the Polls Day. Please get others out to vote. I hope pastors will exercise this type of leadership. I hope pastors will work collaboratively with others. I hope if you're not a pastor, if you're in a church, if you're in a synagogue, if you're in a mosque, you will be concerned socially and politically about your environment. You'll collaborate with others and make sure you caravan, carpool, whatever the case may be, but make sure people in large group numbers are getting out to vote.
Thank you so much, Brother Augustine, for those great words and that call to action. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brother Eric Christopher Webb, and I am elated that you all joined us today for this Souls to the Polls conversation. Remember, pastors, faith-based communities, Alpha Brothers, D9 brothers and sisters, basically engage your churches and your faith-based communities to join into the Souls on the Polls. Give a word of encouragement. Get the buses, the carpools, anything you can do to make sure we show up at this election, we show up at these polling sites, that we vote early, and we have our voices heard. Remember, folks, a voteless people is a hopeless people. Again, I'm Brother Eric Christopher Webb. Good night.